Welcome to the Trailbreaker Podcast. I'm Aaron Feinberg. In this podcast, I explore what it takes to be a trailbreaker. Through intimate conversations with people carving new paths across the landscapes of business, art, and sport, we dig in on how to excel across seemingly disparate endeavors. What drives people who manage to succeed multidimensionally? Is it how they think? Is it meticulous planning and follow-through? Or is it some measure of delusional optimism? My guest today is Michael Landers, the founder of Culture Crossing and also a speaker, consultant, coach, and author. As a child, Michael grew up in 4 different countries, and as an adult has worked in over 35. He helps companies around the globe improve their cross-cultural communication, leadership, and management skills. We talked about what life was like growing up as a third culture kid, the 3 skills needed to enter and integrate into a new culture, and why Entertrainment is the best way to learn. Michael, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Hey, happy to be here, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me.
You are a man who wears many different hats, and so I want to start us off by having you share what are some of those hats that you wear on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, definitely. I find myself wearing a number of different hats depending on the day sometimes. So I would say if someone asks me, hey, what do you do? The answer can shift, right? But some of the things I will say is, well, I'm a consultant. I run a consultancy. I'm an author. I've written a couple of books. I'm a speaker. I do keynotes as well as in-house trainings and seminars. And I'm a coach.
So in terms of the things that you consult on, I know your company is Culture Crossing. Give us a sense of what Culture Crossing is all about. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about where it all came from in terms of how you built skills that have made you an effective person to wear all those hats.
Yeah, definitely. So from the consulting perspective, yeah, culture is the thing. We really work with customers, clients, organizations as a whole, communities on cultivating the desired culture, whatever that might be. Right. For some people, it's just creating it from scratch, from a startup, let's say. For other people, it's shifting it into a desired culture that they're seeking, both from an individual perspective or a leader, as well as a team or a group.
And the companies you work with, you touched on startups, but they also range to some of the biggest global, international companies in the world, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So we've definitely worked with startups who've become big, something like Uber, let's say, and also some of the more established brands around the world in tech, your Apples, your Googles of the world, as well as manufacturing, automotive. So work with pharmaceuticals, pretty much a variety of industries. I would say I'm industry agnostic, and that's not just like, oh, good business. It just happens that culture tends to play across various industries.
And you also have played across various cultures, and I think you have a fascinating story about how you grew up, and I think it was 40 different countries or something?
Well, I've been to 40 different countries. I didn't actually grow up in 40. That would be a very, very trying experience. Although I probably know some people who have had that. But yeah, so it's been a challenging question to answer, Aaron, for like my life, which is, hey, Michael, where are you from? And the answer always has to depend on how much time I think the person wants to spend to listen and how much I feel like sharing in the moment. But the short answer is I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, but I grew up from 3 to 18 in countries throughout Latin America.
All right. So thank you for correcting me. It wasn't 40, but what would you say the number was that you spent any amount of time in?
Well, I grew up in 4 different countries. And then as an adult, I've lived in other countries, a handful, and have traveled and worked in, over 35, 40 or so at this point. I kind of lost track, but growing up from 3 to 18, I grew up in countries throughout South America to begin with. So Colombia, I lived there from the time I was 3 to the time I was 15, Bogota, the capital. And then I moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. My parents moved the family there for a couple of years. And then for my senior year in high school, I moved to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, which is in the Caribbean. So 3 high schools, 4 years, 3 different countries, kind of a different way to grow up. For those of listeners out there who are familiar with what a TCK is, it's a third culture kid. And it's a phenomenon that happens when you are from one country, in my case, the United States, but you grew up in others. So you kind of are not from the countries you grew up in, yet still kind of not from the country that you were born in. And thus a third culture arises. It's kind of like a psychological phenomenon, sociological too. And then also for adults now, a lot of people are living in other countries as adults, global nomads, digital nomads. And so there's this phenomenon of adult third culture kids, ATCKs, where people don't necessarily feel solid in their home culture, but they're kind of comfortable in others. So someone asked me, hey, where's home? I said for years, it was the international terminal at airports. That's where I felt most comfortable.
Look, every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and I have privileged enough to both call you a friend, but also someone I get to work with, both in the training and the coaching space. And so,
yes,
in terms of you having trail broken, not only just literally into new countries, but also into cultures and into friend groups. What was that like for you as a child to have to be able to transition and fluidly, or maybe not so fluidly adapt into new cultures every few years?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging, right? Looking back on it, I think at a very young age, I didn't necessarily know how to process it. I just became what a lot of young kids are, is just very accommodating to say, hey, what are the kids here are playing with a sandbox? Okay, let me go play with the sandbox. And then the kids over here don't play soccer. They play baseball at recess. So let me switch to that. And that was something that stayed with me as an adult, which is as I kind of, if you want to call it, breaking trails, right? Establishing new patterns, establishing new pathways into either existing environments or newly formed environments. For me, observation was always key. What is happening? Like, how much data can I get before I enter into this space to make my trail, right? If there's people that have gone before or variations of that, or anything relevant or similar, I'd want to know. And then I would observe what people were doing. And for me, my way was to be accommodating and open to what other people were doing, all in service of trying to connect with people, right? And establish roots into this trail that I needed to kind of create.
What did that look like as say a younger or say teenage kid in terms of, what it actually looked like day to day? I get the concept of watching and understanding what works for a culture or what works for a friend group, but what did you actually do day to day to sort of integrate?
Yeah. So I think as I got older, I was a little bit more observant of myself, right? And others. And there's one level of like trying to understand, hey, be authentic, be true to you. I don't know, moving around so much, I didn't necessarily know at that age what that meant. So there was a danger, and it happened, of getting lost sometimes, right? Trying to fit in too much. But some things that I did observe was just kind of seeing people and what they did, their hobbies, their likes, how they interacted. And I wouldn't rush to just go, oh, everybody surfs here, so I'm going to surf. Right. But I did say, hey, that's interesting to me. I always wanted to try that, or that looks cool. Let me try that. Right. Because when you enter into any kind of space, there's always a variety. There's a spectrum of what people were doing. So I listened to what I kind of had interest in, but it maybe normally would never have been on the menu, if you will. So in Bogota, it's landlocked, no surfing. Moving to Rio de Janeiro, major surf culture. I'd never known that at all. So everyone's wearing, surf gear to school and stuff. And I didn't go out and go, Mom, I want to buy this. But I did get into boogie boarding, right? I didn't go for the surfing. I was like, boogie boarding was my style. And I dug that and got into it. And it was fun. I did it for years.
Interesting. Because I know a lot of the work that you do with companies is really about helping people to connect, to understand themselves, to understand cultures, to normalize and not pathologize. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was, a couple of years back, you also shared with me how you help people when they are moving to a new country for work and how to get them integrated, not just them, but their families in the new culture, and then help them to be successful, at their job in this new space.
Definitely. And so when you're looking to adapt into a new culture, whether you're moving to it and as you're referring, like helping executives or younger talent, wives, husbands, children on how to be successful, there's three main kind of skills that research has shown to kind of tap into to say, if this person has these, there's a good chance they'll be successful entering into a new culture, whatever that is. And then specific cultures might be more difficult or challenging for certain personalities or certain nationalities than others. Same thing goes with the corporate world, right? I know a lot of people who, have worked for, let's say, a Google, and then they move into an Apple, and that doesn't work so well, or vice versa, or any others. But the three skills are really interesting because thinking back on it, those are things that helped me as a child as well, and as an adult. Number one is tolerance for ambiguity. Can you handle more than one way of doing something? Because if you can't, and you enter into things from how different people eat, utensils they use, to how they communicate, it's going to be challenging. So tolerance for ambiguity, big skill to kind of determine if you're going to be successful. Number two is ability to fail, right? Because guess what? When you enter into a new culture, especially a national culture, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. Things are not going to go perfectly. Life's not going to go perfectly anyway, wherever we are. But people who are uber perfectionists can sometimes have a very difficult challenge in moving to a new culture because they're not an expert, right? So people, I hate being a tourist, but you got to be for a little bit, right? And the third one is sense of humor. Can you laugh at yourself when you are failing? Right. And those are the three things that we've seen. And so it's not that I can say, oh, that person's going to be unsuccessful moving to country X or company Y, but there are things you can see. I'm sure you've seen that with the people that you coach and work with too, especially that first one, I'm guessing, right?
I have 100%, and actually all of them. But I also want to pick up on something you just talked about, which is the humor side of it, because anyone who's been lucky enough to sit in one of your trainings or listen to you speak, I think immediately captures the humorous entertainer that's in you. And obviously you're a wealth of knowledge across all these different areas, but to be able to speak it in a way where everybody's paying attention, they're laughing, they're connecting, it's quite enjoyable. So that's not a pitch for you, but it's definitely
now
a
I have to be funny,
signature.
Man. It is a signature. And I don't know. If someone's like, hey, how does that happen? I don't know, Aaron, actually. I'll tell you that what I found was when I was doing, and when I'm doing trainings and seminars, I want to have fun, right? So that's probably where it comes from. And I've kind of formed this idea of entertrainment. I mean, I've talked about this before, where you're training, you're learning something, but who said it can't be entertaining as well, right? And that ends up happening, and especially when it comes to concepts that might be a little academic, right, or a little heavy. As you know, some of the topics that we both talk about can be a little much to process. So I've had this ability to take something that can be kind of heady, can be kind of deep, not make it shallow, but just make it more digestible. And humor seems to happen. Now people go, oh, is that because humor works across cultures? Everything's funny across culture. And I'm like, no, right? Sarcasm does not translate well across cultures. I was living in Japan, and early on, I didn't recognize and didn't learn that kind of thing, that sarcasm didn't translate well. And people would be like, oh, we have another meeting later today. I'm like, oh, great. I can't wait for that one. And then they're like, oh, really? Me too. I'm like, no. Right. Oh, that's going to be great. Oh, I think so too. What? No. Oh, this is good. Oh, I think so too. No. Right. Like sarcasm doesn't translate well. So, but humor, if you can make people laugh or find some humor in the moment of something naturally, is kind of what I tend to bring. But I'm not looking like, ooh, I can be funny here. Right. I think that's the other key. But you learn, what kind of works for you. And for at the end of the day, it's just being authentic. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Not that was too entertaining what I just did, but there you go.
No, I've seen you go there, and I'll make sure the audience comes and finds you live. It translates much better in person. So look, I mean, I get this, the trajectory from, your younger years, and, you got some in the moment real life experience,
Yep.
trail breaking into different cultures and all the things you learned to set the conditions for then later what you studied. And I just want to quickly hit on, what did you study in college that gave you sort of the sort of rounded out professional perspective or the degree in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. And so in undergrad, I studied international relations, and then I really find what you study in undergrad might not necessarily matter that much. 2 weeks after graduation, I moved to Japan. I lived in Japan for several years. And as I came back to the United States, I was thinking of going to become a teacher, because a lot of my family had masters in education. And I was planning on doing that. And my mother had sent in a brochure when I was in Japan of a university called Lesley University, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they had a master's in intercultural relations. And I was like, what is that? This is back a little bit. So I was like, what is that? And I looked through it and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I could become an expert in culture, if you will, and help people who are working across cultures and within cultures. And so that ended up being the master's that I got. And it was interesting because the program, Aaron, was really all about oneself. It was heavily focused on understanding you as a starting point before helping others understand themselves. So very similar to kind of, I'm sure, some of the work that you've done on yourself and the space that you've played in different times of your life. But that's kind of what allowed me to have, something. And then when I got into cultural consultancy, it was very nice to have for credibility. And I'm sitting in my office right now and I'm looking over to the left and I have my binders from Lesley still there. So it's really something that I utilize when people are like, oh, I use that every day. I do. I really use what I learned. It's excellent. It still holds true. And now when I went, there was only a few schools in the country that you could get a master's in that. Now there's many, but it's kind of where it's grown.
Very cool. And yes, I would say that, whether it was school psychology, master's, or the dual credentials in counseling, or, becoming an internationally certified coach, the work often starts with yourself. And it's really hard to be of service to anybody in a modality if you're not pretty buttoned up. So that makes a lot of sense. So there's this other side of you, which I want to get into, and whether it's because you have a natural penchant for entertaining in comedy, or because you actually have a lot of experience in it. Tell us a little bit about your life as an actor and kind of how this all fits in.
Yeah, definitely. So I was acting in plays for years since I was a very young child, overseas, at these schools, and my family was involved in that. So it was something I always liked and had some level of talent for it, I guess, but I didn't study it in college. And so even after grad school, right when I was just finishing grad school, I was like, hey, I always wanted to kind of try that out a little bit more. And so I chose to do that at that point. I'd finished grad school and I was like, hey, I'm going to try this acting thing for a little bit. And that just led to me to kind of start to have some success as an actor in Boston and then in New York City. In theater, I had a sketch comedy troupe for many years. So that's where the comedy came in. And then I started to kind of do, little bits of movies and TVs, just to make a living. And that led to me realizing, okay, if I want to really break a trail here, what is it that my goal is, right? My goal was not to be famous. My goal was not to be on the cover of People magazine or anything. It really was. I was very mindful. I was like, I want to make a living as an actor. That's what it was. And I didn't want to define a living as, $10,000 a year. There was like a number. I was like, so what I found was, after doing the work in New York City in particular, was commercials and voiceovers were going to probably be the easiest trail to break for that goal. And so I dedicated energy and effort a couple of years to figure out, how do I get that? How do I do that? And then I ended up doing that. And in that was, lots of fun stuff. I did other things, film and TV here too, but it's mostly voices, which I always had a natural tendency and talent to do, accents and cartoons. And so it was great. I was able to do that at the same time as continue the consulting career.
When we talked about this, prior to today's show, there's, I think, this element of strategic thinking or sort of purposeful planning and what you were going to go after versus what you thought wouldn't necessarily be worth your time. And, it was interesting. It seems like you sidestepped some of the pitfalls. Like, obviously everything that, is worthwhile often takes more work than you'd like it to, but it seemed like, you were thoughtful and purposeful in trying to avoid some of those holes that others fall into.
Yeah. And I think purposeful planning is well said as a concept, right? That worked for me. And, you've interviewed so many people on this cool podcast, and everyone's got their own way they break trails that they break, right? So this is like, for your listeners, is like, oh, what a great resource, because I can take a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person. So what works for me is not going to work for everybody. But for me, the planning bit was saying, hey, where do I want to get to? What are the obstacles? And for me, it was like, how can I streamline the process a little bit, right? It still might take years, but the planning was more about getting as much data as I could around how do I get there. So acting is an interesting one because I reached that level where I had a top tier agent. I was auditioning in New York City probably 5 or 6 times a day. Right. And I learned early on, years before, that an agent told me, hey, good actors book one out of every 40 jobs they go out for. Okay. One out of every 40. He's like, that's what a decent person does. And that's what an agency was looking for. If I send you on 40 auditions, you book one, I'm going to love you. If you book quicker than that, you're amazing. Right. And so at that point in my career, Aaron, I was probably auditioning once a week. So I did the math and I'm like, this is not good. Right. So I was like, how can I get in those rooms? And that took years and understanding of who I could meet and improving my own skill set until I got to that point where I was going out 5 or 6 times a day, 5 or 6 times 5, 30. There you go. Right. And I got to that point and was like, okay. So that was an example of purposeful planning of saying, what do I need? Where do I need to get to achieve that goal? And then figuring out all the ways how to do that.
In gathering that data or figuring out, the numbers or the, whatever it is that you needed to find in order to help you make a different decision, was that easy stuff to come across? And it was just that, you just spent a little bit of time looking for it, or did you have to do something else to gather it, whether it was build relationships where people would tell it to you, or whether you had to be, somehow more creative in sourcing it?
Yeah. So I think initially it was at every opportunity I could work, be with anybody who might know stuff, just to ask, right? Ask good questions, because you never know where you're going to get your data from if you don't ask questions. Right. So that was an initial start to get that data. The other thing was, when acting is an example of no trail to follow, really, right? Meaning if I want to be a lawyer, I know what I can do. Right. I know that I can, go get a Juris Doctor, and then I need to study for the bar and all those kind of things. And I could do that without the JD, but still there's a trail. If you want to be a teacher, trail. There's really wasn't a trail for the actor. You saw what people got to, but there wasn't like all these books on, here's a book on how to do a monologue, but there was very little about the business aspect of it. And that came naturally to me. So I would share that with friends. So there were so many actors who were much, much better than me and who were not successful, meaning, I wouldn't call them failed actors, but they weren't able to make a living. And a lot of it had nothing to do with their talent. It had to do with their business acumen. The business of acting was huge.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. And we see that in our world as well, right?
Yeah. The ability to, to coach and to train, those are skill sets that, 1 second, I'm coughing up.
You're good. You're good. You got a little of a clap here. Got a little emotional.
Yeah, that was really touching, Michael. No. But yeah, it's one of those things that, you can be a great coach, you can be a great trainer in front of the room, and you can't sell, right? And you can't sell from, a Socratic or customer focused place where, you have all the skills, but it's just not going to be the thing that lands you the gig, or you're just thinking about it in the wrong way. So it's really,
it's true.
That's really
and the flip of that too is you might meet people who are mediocre at their job, but are uber successful because they have this great ability to market, sell, whatever it is, right? So you have both sides to it. I find. So yeah, that's the thing. When there's no trail in front of you, for me, it was curiosity. It was the same way when I moved to different countries, where I would observe and learn and ask and say, oh, what's this like here? And why do you do that here? And what's cool here? And what's interesting for you here? Oh, interesting, right? Getting curious about it allowed for people to share more information. And it was a gathering of little bits of, oh, that's how you get there, and this is what you can do. But it wasn't this perfect thing, right? So it did take time. It took patience. It took curiosity. It took resilience too. I always told people that I wish I'd been an actor before I started dating until after, because I got rejected so many times as an actor, even multiple times a day, where I didn't even know I was getting rejected, right? Because my agents wouldn't share it with me. It allowed me, when I went to, if I was nervous, to ask someone out on a date, like I had no fear after that. I wasn't aggressive. I just was like, it's okay. No worries. But when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, yeah.
So. There's lots of other additions. And I think that curiosity is such a good component, because I think that people are so fascinating. And there's been more than one time in my life where people were just like, why do you talk to everybody on the street? Or you're constantly looking around? Why aren't you present? And I said, no, I'm totally present with you. I just find people so interesting. If I could sit on the park bench and just people watch all day, as active and as sporty as I am, if I have nothing going on or I'm tired from my activities and I just want to sit and watch, I learn so much about what's going on. I think it's like such a fascinating puzzle to sort of look at people and the way they interact and go, oh, I think that's what's about to happen. Or I bet I know what that person's feeling. And I just think if you spend the time being curious and paying attention, you can pick up a lot.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
And so you've got this other side of you, another trail breaker in you and another hat, and that's as an author. And I know you have a book that just came out, and maybe you could share with us a little bit about what that's all about.
Yeah, definitely. So I've written two books. One, most recent one with my colleagues, Dr. Tim Dukes, which is called Present Company, and it's about cultivating cultures of high performance in teams and organizations. That one just came out a couple of months ago. And then my other book, Culture Crossing, which is discover the key to kind of working globally, right? The key to unlocking global effectiveness in today's multicultural marketplace, was released 2017, I think. And I don't identify as a writer, right? And I just, people say, oh, have you written? I'm like, I don't identify as a writer. And so writing a book was no doubt challenging, right? But I took the same approach that I've done in breaking trails in other places and other times in my life, which is really doing a lot of research on what is it, how do you do it? And I think some of the early research on was like, oh, I'm going to write a book and that's it. I won't have to work again. Not the case, right? I mean, some people are blessed and get that success level. My books have done well. They sell, thousands and thousands of copies, but it's not like, woohoo, I'm done, right? So that was an interesting one from the business perspective. Writing a book's not going to necessarily make you money, but the process was interesting. And I researched that. And then most importantly, and you'll hear this from lots of people, which is, do you have something to say? Do you have something to share, and can it be done in a way that will allow people to engage with it?
And so the way that you felt with the first book versus the second book, similar, or were there lessons learned from that first one that changed the way? And I'm not saying the outcome was maybe any different with the second book, but just the way you felt or the process through it.
Yeah, the process was very different. One, writing with my colleague, just that dynamic was an interesting new trail to break, and worked out well. But more importantly, the business side, having already broke the trail once, the second time was so much easier, right? Just in terms of understanding where I could go to, who I need. There's also, if you have done it once in this arena and your book does okay, it's a little bit easier to get someone to believe in you the second time. I can think we can see that in a lot of aspects of business and life. If you've done it once, it's easier the second time. But the writing the book, what might have been harder the second time, just because it was a different topic and collaborating. But the business side made it much easier versus the first time, which was unknown.
Sure. So, as a man who obviously is got a long history of putting yourself in literal and figuratively different places. And, on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, you could be at a big company, a small company, doing a speaking gig, doing a virtual training, doing a book signing. Anything else that's been popping for you that we might not know about or that's coming up?
Well, I'd say that the one thing that you key on is, for me, in terms of, I think, and I link this to success, which is, at least as I'm defining it, which is I thrive in diversity of thought, diversity of people, but for me personally, diversity of work. So that week that you just said, oh, you could be doing this and this, I'm like, yes, those are the weeks. That's what I like. Right. And I learned that somewhat early on, and I tried to fight it in when I was trying to build the business, say, yeah, I'll do that 30 times. And then after 10 times, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I powered through, but then when those kind of opportunities came back, I'm like, you know what? I'm good for 5, and then let's find somebody else. So as you're breaking that trail, this is for me, as I was breaking that trail, taking time to recognize who I was and what motivated me the most, because when I could keep that space sacred, the trail broke much more evenly. right? And more fluidly. So, and
That
now to answer your question, anything else popping? I've been doing a lot of work these days on inclusion and how to cultivate cultures of inclusion, inclusive mindsets for leaders up and down the org and in various functions, right? And one of the things that's been kind of interesting is helping people take a look at inclusion is obviously about people first, but it's also about innovation and connection, inclusive of creativity. So all of these kind of things have been helpful. And it's the same kind of message that I've done throughout my life and then my career, which is recognize how inclusive you are and your capability of how inclusive you could be. And then what are the obstacles to it? So if we look at the trail breaking thing, recognize where you want to go, recognize where you could go, and what are some obstacles that are in the way.
Amazing. So Michael, I really appreciate your time today. And if folks want to reach out, what's the best way for them to contact you and have a chit chat?
Yeah, so I'm not on TikTok. I got no IG. I'm not on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn. Right. So LinkedIn's a great way to reach out to me. And then also feel free to reach me directly via my website. Just Google Culture Crossing and I should come up first on there. But those are two easy ways to reach out to me. And I'm on Twitter sometimes at Culture Crossing. But those would be the three main areas to reach out to me. And obviously on this podcast.
Perfect. Well, look, my friend, I appreciate your story, the time you spent with me today, and all the best for the rest of this year. And looking forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Continued success. Thanks for having me.
The Trailbreaker podcast is created by Aaron Feinberg with production support provided by Michael Morey. More interviews and videos can be found at aaronfeinberg.com.